All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to class. Today, we are going to talk about absolutism in Central Europe. Okay, so of course, our discussion has been about absolutism. We talked about absolutism in places like France. We talked about it in England. We talked about it in Russia the last time we spoke. But today, we're going to get into Central Europe. And really, when we talk about Central Europe, of course, all of Central Europe has still kind of been characterized as being this Holy Roman Empire. We can remember Central Europe was just kind of this big mess of different groups and peoples and all this stuff. There was no real banner that came in and just said, hey, this is what this is. That's why the Catholic Church kind of swept in and said, hey, we'll just call this the Holy Roman Empire and just say that, oh, it's part of the Catholic Church. But of course, the Pope has no authority to do this, has no right to do this. I mean, if you're not a Catholic, you obviously aren't going to say that the Pope has no reason to do this. But again, that area had still kind of been this cluster of countries that we'll look into in just a moment. Okay. Now, of course, the person that was supposed to be, quote unquote, in charge of this land was that person known as the Holy Roman Emperor. Okay. Now, we had talked about how Charlemagne was the first one. And of course, we talked about how Charles V from Spain was one. When we talked about absolutism in Europe, or in absolutism in England, excuse me. But understand, this title of Holy Roman Emperor was more of just like a symbolic title. Is this political, I guess you can say, face of the Catholic Church, held no real power outside of the Catholic Church. I mean, again, if you're saying, yes, I am the Holy Roman Emperor, and you're talking to somebody that's Protestant or Muslim or Jewish or whatever, it carries no weight at all. I mean, it really doesn't. I mean, if you're a Catholic, yes, but if you're not, it really doesn't. Okay, so just kind of keep those things in mind when we talk about Central Europe. Now, today, though, the two countries that we're going to see that form in Central Europe that will be the basis of this absolutism discussion are going to be Prussia, okay, which will be in the northern portion of Central Europe, and Austria, okay, and we'll talk about these two countries, how these two countries kind of become rivals of one another. We'll get into all that in just a second, but before we do, let's review our information from last time. Of course, we had talked about absolutism. For those who like to pay attention, okay, we talked about absolutism in Russia, okay, and of course we had talked about guys like Ivan the Terrible as kind of being the first Tsar, and of course we kind of talked about what his temperaments were like, and we spoke about how they had pretty much declared their independence from Mongolia. Okay, somebody described to me what that independence from Mongolia was like. Was it a big, long, drawn-out, bloody war, or what was it? Can you remember how Russia got its independence from Mongolia? It was real simple, real easy. There it is. They literally just said, hey, by the way, we're independent, okay? And if you want to bring your armies and fight, let's fight. Well, of course, Mongolia at this time, the Mongolian Empire at this time did not have the strength to resist this. They didn't have the strength to stop this. So basically, Russia just kind of became independent, okay? They kind of became this major country at this point. But, of course, there had to be some steps that really kind of made Russia this strong country. So, of course, we fast forward 100 years or so into the future, and we will have this guy that comes along named Peter the Great. Now, Peter the Great will obviously be, whenever throughout history, if they ever attach the Great to your name, there's got to be some great things that you do, okay? So when it came to Peter, however, what are some of the things that Peter did that kind of made him the great one, or that contributed to the history of Russia? Anybody? I told you all several, so give me one. Yes. Okay, so he's going to make the men in Russia shave their beards. He's also going to make them change their dress and start dressing more like they were in places like Paris and London and stuff like that. Why? Why did he do that? Why did he make them shave their beards and change their dress? Okay, because he wants them to be more modern. He doesn't want them to be stuck in the old days. He says the most modern places, forward-thinking places right now are places like England and Paris and in parts of Germany and parts of Italy and things like that. So we're going to be more like that to progress. Now, what's something else that Peter did that really kind of solidified them? Yes. Okay, so at this point, Russia had been landlocked. Okay, we're going to remember they had no access to ports, had no access to the sea. So what he's going to do is he's going to lead this campaign in the north. And he is going to take a ton of land up in the northern portion of that territory there and gives him access to the sea. Now at this location where he had taken this land, he is going to build this extremely modern city. Of course, they're going to name it after himself. It's going to be called St. Petersburg. And of course, that's going to become the capital of Russia at this point. But he's going to build this very, very modern city to kind of usher their society into more modern times. And it was. I mean, I showed you pictures of St. Petersburg, which were modern pictures. I mean, pictures from today. But understand that St. Petersburg, other than, maybe like take away like the technology of today, didn't look too different back then than it does now. Okay, so that's how modern it looked. And of course, it was very futuristic to most people of the world that traveled to St. Petersburg. Now, after Peter, okay, the next, I guess you can say, czar of note, or the or czar that becomes kind of famous for history, is going to be Catherine the Great. Now, tell me something, and of course, we talked about some good things and some bad things about Catherine, okay? Somebody tell me some good things that Catherine did. What's a good thing that she did? Anybody? Yes. Okay, so she's going to expand, okay? She's going to do this massive expansion east for Russia. So she'll actually expand south a little bit to get access to more seaports on the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and then she's going to expand east, okay? She's going to take all the territory all the way through Siberia, all the way to the Pacific coast. She doesn't stop at the Pacific coast. Where does she continue to push on to and take land? Okay, present-day Alaska, Western Canada, into present-day like Washington and Oregon. Okay, so they take all this territory. But remember, the point we made was that, today Russia is still the largest country in the world. But, and it looks impressive on a map. But remember, just because she takes the land doesn't mean that like all these people pop up out of the ground and the land becomes completely populated with Russians. It doesn't. It's just kind of, a lot of it is just wide open land. I mean, especially in areas of Siberia where people don't live out there. The conditions are extremely harsh. People don't live there, but it looks cool on a map. It's a huge chunk of land. I mean, it's kind of like me saying, yes, I claim Antarctica. Well, you can't really live in Antarctica, okay? You can say all the land looks good and it's a big piece of land, but at the end of the day, it's not very practical. So that's going to be kind of a thing that happens when she takes over all this territory. And then the same goes when they come across the Bering Straits into Alaska and on the western coast of America. They take this territory, but understand it doesn't mean that it just becomes fully colonized and populated with Russians at this time. Okay? Yes. She was, and that was a bad thing that she did. Very good. Thank you for bringing that up. One of the bad things about Catherine was that, yes, she believed that the poor people, I mean, of course, you can say she believed in that divine right of kings, but she believed that the poor people in society, their role is to prop up the rich people. So she is going to pass laws that are going to be very, very harsh on the Slavs. Okay, she called them the Slavs, or the Slavic people, and of course, Slav or Slavic is going to derive its name from slave, because she is going to see these people as her slaves. All right, she's going to pass laws that restrict their movement, restrict their jobs, restrict pretty much their entire lives, and forces them into labor to basically benefit her and benefit the upper class. So she is going to be known for her harsh treatment of the Slavic people, the serfs that she called them, the Slavs, the whole thing. Now, another thing that Catherine's going to do that's going to be, I guess you can say, kind of beneficial for history is that, yes, she is also going to flood money into the arts. We've talked about a lot of kings and queens that flood money into the arts. But when it comes to Catherine, I mean, we're going to see, money gets flooded into into dance. Okay, so those of us that are familiar with like ballet or have heard of like the Russian ballets, well, this is where the kind of foundation for this is. And I mean, for the world, I mean, even today in our modern society, the Russian ballet are kind of known as being some of the best ballets in the world. I mean, some of the best dancers, the whole thing. Well, this kind of starts at this time. We'll also see those of us that might be in band. Let's put our phone away, by the way. Those of us that might be in like dance or I'm sorry, in music or band or orchestra or whatnot, we also see a lot of these Russian composers come out around this time that make a lot of very famous music that we would all be very familiar with today. Okay, so a lot of this kind of comes from this funding from Catherine the Great. Anyway, let's move into today's material. Okay, so now, like I said, we're going to shift our focus into Central Europe. We're going to talk specifically about the countries of Austria and Prussia. So with that being said, we'll do this real quick. Very simple for our question time. In regards to Austria and Prussia, once I get all this stuff to pop up correctly, hang on. These things. Okay. All right. So right there. So in regards to Austria and Prussia, summarize what absolutism was like in Austria and summarize what absolutism was like in Prussia. Okay. Like I had told you guys earlier in the preview, today's lesson is not going to be super long. It's just because it is strike time day. We don't have time to really get into the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment very properly. So that's why we're just going to kind of break it into 2 days. But absolutism like in Austria, absolutism like in Prussia. Let's write those down now. Okay. All right, as you're writing that stuff down, okay, of course. So what we start seeing is, yes, we start seeing 2 countries start to emerge out of Central Europe, okay? The first that we will talk about will be Austria. Now, Austria is going to be kind of in the southern portion of Central Europe, and of course, we'll see that they become kind of a major player. In fact, we're going to talk about Austria quite a bit, all the way through World War II. We'll talk about Austria, okay? Now, to the north of them will be Prussia. Now, Prussia is going to be broken up into a couple of different sections of land, and we'll see that on the map in a little bit. And Prussia, obviously, even today, Prussia is not a country anymore. Prussia is going to kind of evolve itself into Poland. Okay, so kind of what we would see as modern day Poland is really what we're talking about when we really talk about Prussia. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Okay, so as you can see, of course, it is a little bit all over the place here. But if we can see, of course, Austria is this kind of a gray blue color down there in the central, in the kind of the southern, I guess you can say southeastern portion of Central Europe. Okay, up in the north, of course, you're going to have this area here that is in green. Now on the map here it says Brandenburg, and then of course there's this green and purple shaded in area that's called Prussia. Now, of course, eventually all of this will be kind of absorbed into this where it says Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth. Okay, it'll all be kind of a part of Poland, but that's going to be the area we're speaking about. So again, this kind of thin little strip of land that goes across the north, and then that little piece that goes in right there would be considered Prussia, and then Austria to the south. Okay. Now, speaking of Austria, okay, what we're going to see in Austria is this. Now, this is going to be kind of a succession of a king to a queen. And really, when you talk about absolutism in Austria, the person that comes to note or that comes to mind more than anybody is going to be Maria Theresa, which you see on the bottom down here. Now, the big thing about Maria Theresa is going to be this, okay? Of course, obviously, a lot of times, as we have talked about before, the fact that she is a woman in charge is kind of a big deal at this point in history. Okay? The fact that she became this leader. But the way that she became the leader was this. As you can see right here on the north, on the top of this slide, her father, Charles VI, was the king of Prussia, okay? And when he was in charge, of course, he did not really see anybody else kind of being able-bodied enough to take over for him. He saw his daughter, however, he didn't see a male heir being adequate to take over for him, but he saw his daughter as being a very intelligent, very smart person, very savvy person. So what he's going to do is, as it says here, he is going to sign this thing called the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713. Now, pretty much what happens on that is that he basically tells his nobles, he tells all the wealthy and rich people all throughout Austria that basically, hey, I'm commanding you as the king to sign this treaty that says when I die, my daughter will be able to take over power. Okay, so this is like it says here, giving power to his daughter upon his death. Okay, so it kind of gives her this right. Now, a lot of times when things like this happen, it's kind of a setup for failure because the person that takes over usually is not very adequate when it comes to ruling and all that stuff. But Maria Theresa was. Okay, now Austria, they will have a pretty adequate military. Of course, we're going to see that they will come into conflict between them and Prussia quite often. Okay, in fact, what's going to happen is that Austria and Prussia, they're going to fight a lot of kind of proxy wars. And what I mean by proxy wars is this. And in fact, this is going to be a preview for something that comes on later on in history. But what happens is that Austria here is going to find themselves allied with England. Okay, so they kind of ally themselves with England at this point. Well, Prussia is going to ally themselves with France. So what that means is that since they're allies, well, in some conflicts where England and France go to war with each other, like the 7 Years' War, for example, which in America was called the French Indian War, when that war broke out, Austria and Prussia are going to find themselves in the conflict. They're going to find themselves in the war because they're allied with England and France. And of course, these two are kind of rivals with each other. So they get into a fight just like everybody else is. Okay, 1 second, please. I'm sorry, guys. Give me 1 second, please. I'm trying to get attendance done while we're talking here, like always. Okay. All right. So, of course, with Austria, okay, of course, Maria Theresa, like I said, she will become this leader. Now, the thing about Maria Theresa is going to be this. She will actually be a very good leader for Austria, okay? She will attempt to keep Austria out of war. She can do everything she can to keep peace, but of course, it will be inevitable. I mean, she will have to fight. She will have to kind of go into these conflicts with Prussia eventually. We'll also see that, yeah, because she is a woman, and I mean, it's a pretty bad thing to say, but because she's a woman, she is going to be challenged quite a bit. People are going to come in and try to take her over or take her out. But of course, she is going to stand steadfast. She is not going to back down. She's not going to go into hiding. She stays there and defends Austria, which is going to give her a lot of credit by her people. I mean, the people are going to see her as being this strong-willed leader that's not going to just bend to other people, okay? So that's going to be a big, big thing for Maria Theresa and kind of endure her to people. Now, just like we talked about with other leaders that have come through, she does definitely want to appeal to her people. So, yes, she's going to stress things like education. She's going to plug money into education to try to get education extended out, not just to the rich and the elite and the nobles. She's also going to try and get your common people an opportunity for an education. That doesn't mean like public schools. It just means give them an opportunity for a basic education. Of course, she's going to put money to the arts, put money to music, put money to dramas, to all this stuff to try to get, again, endure the people, kind of advance their society. Okay. Now, on the flip side of that, you're going to have Prussia. Okay. Now, when it comes to Prussia, all right, the first kind of major leader of Prussia we're going to talk about is this guy here, Frederick I of Prussia. Okay. Now, the thing about Frederick I is going to be this. Frederick I, excuse me, when he takes over in Prussia, he is going to make Prussia like a military machine, okay? So they are going to definitely be a military society. I mean, in essence, not as harsh as, but very similar to like Spartan society. From a young age on, all boys that are born are going to be put through the military. They are going to have military training from a very young age all the way through adulthood, okay? And again, everything they do in their society, because the king is kind of in charge, is meant to fuel the military. So if you're a tailor, you're going to be making uniforms for soldiers. If you are a blacksmith, you're going to be making guns for soldiers. If you're a cobbler, which means you're making shoes, you're making boots for soldiers. That's kind of what the whole society is going to be based on. Now, because of this, we will see that that the Prussian army is going to be pretty good. I mean, in fact, they're going to be, at this point in history, probably the best trained army in the world. Now, they're not going to be the largest, okay? They're not going to be the biggest and the baddest and the best, but they're probably going to be the best trained army out there, probably some of the best fighters that are out there, okay? Of course, a lot like Spartans, their army is never going to just total into like, very big. I mean, we talk about the Spartan army was never huge, but yet one-on-one, the Spartans would kick your butt. These Prussians were like this, okay? In fact, the Prussian army was so good, or such good fighters, that a lot of times when conflicts would arise around the world, other countries would hire the Prussian army. They basically become what's known as a mercenary. So another country would come in and say, hey, Frederick, if I give you this much money, can I borrow your army to go fight somewhere? Okay, in fact, even though Prussia found themselves allied with France during our American Revolution that happened here in our country, when the American Revolution starts out, England actually hires the Prussian army to go over and fight first. In fact, they referred to these guys as the Hessian mercenaries. Okay, if you maybe can remember that from your U.S. history class, we'll talk about it during the Age of Revolutions into the next chapter. Where they're going to hire the Prussian army to go try and put down the American Revolution when it first breaks out. Okay, so that again shows you the skill and the kind of reverence there was towards the Prussian army. Now, things like religion. Although they did have Catholics there, they did have Protestants there. It wasn't like a big push thing by the government. Okay, so as far as religious freedom or religious beliefs, it wasn't that big of a deal because again, it was mainly centered on the military, centered on what they could do there. Okay, now of course after Frederick, okay, you're going to have this other guy named William Frederick of the First of Prussia. So of course you have Frederick. Now you've got Frederick William the First of Prussia. Okay, so he's going to keep this same attitude. Okay, but what we're going to see is that he will, to an extent, keep this whole military idea, this military machine, rocking and rolling. Of course, it's going to be through him that they will come into conflict with Austria. Okay, because at this point, as far as Central Europe is concerned, Austria is the other big kid on the block. So they're trying to show their supremacy by pushing into Austria lands. Of course, the Austrians are trying not to give up territory. So yes, we see this conflict emerge between Austria and Prussia at this time during Frederick William I. Okay, this is not going to be a great deal. This is not going to be a good thing for either side. There's going to be lots of fighting, and of course, they're going to try and get England and France to kind of jump in on this. They don't, but again, it's still not a good look that these two countries are at war over a little strip of land. Okay, now the thing that becomes significant is not so much Frederick William I during his time. It's going to be what happens to the Frederick's son. Okay, now Frederick's son is going to be Frederick William's son is going to be another Frederick. Okay, and of course, when he's a child, of course, he's going to be put through this kind of military training just like anybody else was. But Frederick's son, who's another Frederick II, he's never really going to like the military, okay? He's never really going to be big in the military. Now, he gets this formal education because he's the son of the king, and he's the next apparent king that will come up. But he is more into music, okay? Like he was known to kind of have this flute, and he would play this flute, and he was into art. He was into things like that were not so much fighting and killing and military machine and all that stuff, okay? Now, the story goes about Frederick, and again, kind of think about this. This would be a bad situation just for anybody to go through. But imagine this guy being the prince, being the son of the king, all right? And he gets around 12, 13 years old, and he decides that I don't want this to be my life. I don't want to go be this general and leader and king and all that stuff. So Frederick II and one of his friends, okay, about his same age, they decide they're going to run away. They're going to run off. They're going to go live somewhere, have no titles, and just kind of live their life as normal people, okay? So Frederick II and his friend take off. They run away in the middle of the night, okay? Well, of course, William Frederick freaks out when he sees his son is gone. He doesn't know if his son has been kidnapped or what's happened. So what he does is he sends his soldiers out to find his son. So they go out far and wide looking for Frederick II and his friend, and they find them, okay? Of course, they're younger guys. They don't get too far away. They get them, and instead of bringing them back and, I was so worried about you, Frederick William says, look, I'm going to treat my son harshly. I want my son to realize that this isn't acceptable. So what he does is he chains up his son, like puts shackles on his 13-year-old son, puts shackles on his friend, and brings him back to the castle and puts them in the dungeons, puts them basically locks them up in jail cells under the castle. Okay, so 13-year-old kids. Again, this one of them is supposed to be the prince, the son of the king, and he's down in the dungeons. Now, it doesn't end there. He keeps them chained up, keeps them locked up, and to the point where they're going to find, basically, they're not going to find Frederick II guilty of all this stuff. They're going to say that his friend is to blame. And so because of this, in front of Frederick II, he watches as his friend gets executed. Okay, 13-year-old kid gets killed. So it's pretty jacked up. Now, imagine this kind of treatment would mess up anybody. I mean, it would give you some emotional scars. It would probably really, really kind of mess you up. Well, Frederick II is going to stay basically in this dungeon. He's going to continue his military training, and I mean, his dad's like super like tough love, like we're gonna toughen you up. We're gonna get all these ideas out of your head, the whole thing, so that when Frederick II gets old enough to take over as king, he does. Okay, but the reason why I don't go to the next slide, I'm not going to the next slide on purpose. Now, again, everything is pretty much stacked up against Frederick II, okay? For him to be a tyrant and mean and like an Ivan the Terrible type of person. But what happens is this. When Frederick II takes over, okay, now he is going to inherit a war that his dad had started, okay? And so for the first 10 years that Frederick II is in charge, he is going to kind of preside over this war. He's going to command his armies. Of course, they're going to fight the Austrians. But what's going to happen is that the Prussians will win this war after 10 years of Frederick II being the new king. Now, after that, for the next 20 years after that, because Frederick served for 30 years, for the next 20 years, Prussia will be at peace. He's going to usher in laws and reforms to kind of back off a lot of these military trainings. He's going to do all these things to kind of adequately serve his people and help the people out. In fact, Frederick II, even though everything was stacked up against him, he will be known in Prussia as Frederick the Great, because even though all these bad things happen, and yes, for the first 10 years he has to fight this war, the next 20 will be peaceful. He'll not pick any fights. He's gonna reform their society. Now, yes, they're still gonna have a very, very tough military, a very strong military, but he is not going to force it as much as his predecessors had done before him. Okay, so because of this, again, Prussia is going to become a pretty major player, even though it's kind of this small little sliver of land that we showed right there. They will be this major player in Europe. Okay, as a result of guys like Frederick the Great. Now, of course, and with this being said, you can see that, yes, Prussia is going to kind of expand its territory and take everything you see now here in this kind of dark blue. Of course, you've got Austria down here on the bottom. And really on this map, you really are going to see all of these absolutist countries that we have seen. So, of course, we talked about France. We talked about England under Charles V. We talked a little bit about Spain. We talked about Russia, the Russian Empire out that way, Austria and Prussia all together, with the central portion, as you see right down through here, the central portion of Europe still being kind of this cluster of countries and peoples and all that date back all the way from the time that the Roman Empire had fallen. Okay, these areas were still pretty much wild and wide open. Now, there will be a time later on where it will unify and it will all become Germany, but not to that point yet. Okay, all right, that is where we're going to wrap up for today. Like I said, it was going to be a short lesson. So what I want you to do right now is make sure we answer our questions. Let's make sure we get our summary done on the bottom. Okay.